It is in essence like living in a mildly dissociated state. Words without music, moving through the motions, doing the errand, listening to the banal conversation where they ask you nothing about yourself. You're basically an unpaid TaskRabbit. One of the worst, biggest, greatest aspects of the fallout of a narcissistic relationship is feeling that we are part of the problem just because we're a part of it. This is why so many people who have been in narcissistic relationships or are from narcissistic families, and frankly even friend groups or workplaces, but this is particularly true in close relationships like families and intimate relationships. That's why so many of you feel like you're narcissistic and like you're the problem. We assimilate to these systems. We completely almost give in to them. We make uncomfortable accommodations. We learn unhealthy patterns. The one thing that everyone does in a narcissistic system, especially families, but again, it seems to happen in all of them, is they lie. Not just the narcissistic person or people, but everyone. And so let's break that down. The narcissistic, antagonistic, manipulative, toxic person, whatever, is going to lie. That's built into the personality style. It's one of the qualifiers, right? Being deceitful, warping the truth, denying reality. The foundation of a narcissistic system is built on lies. Narcissistic people lie so that they can look good to the world, to hide the bad things they do, to maintain a version of reality that works for them, to maintain power over others because they feel entitled to get away with stuff, but also know what looks right or good to the world, so they lie so they can get away with it. The delusional reality of the narcissistic system is that they are perfect and special, and lies will be told so they can maintain the status quo and maintain this delusion of their ultra specialness and perfection. Lies come somewhat naturally to a narcissistic person. They lie well because they lie often and they feel entitled to get the thing that the lie gets them. Now, they don't lie the way a psychopathic person lies. Psychopathic folks with their down-regulated autonomic nervous systems, they don't break a sweat at all. They are built to lie. Narcissistic people do have enough guilt that if you could learn their tells, eye contact, body movements, you will start to learn over time what the patterns are when they do lie. Because ultimately, the looking good piece and feeling entitled to what they want tends to be what wins the day for them. But even if you detect it, it doesn't matter. They will gaslight you if you call them out on the lie. You know the drill. So there's no really addressing that pattern. But let's go back to what this video is about. Everyone lies. I think almost everyone has to lie when they're in a narcissistic system that they cannot escape. Everyone. And that means you, me, all of us. And that is what messes with our heads, because it doesn't feel good to lie. We may not be liars by nature, but we'll often do it in these systems. And most of it is sheer survivalism. Once upon a time, as a kid, you may very well have tried to get your needs met or communicated by walking right through the front door and asking for something directly. Like I said, this is less so, if you were a kid to walk in there and ask for your need, but certainly in an adult relationship. And if you did do that with a narcissistic person, you'd be met with anger and basically being cut down and being called bad or greedy or selfish or whatever. So you learn the back doors, the ways of asking for something that the narcissistic person would agree to. The not telling the truth about why you can't go to something they want you to go to. You can't tell them the truth that you don't want to, or about where you are, or about what you're working on. You may feel you aren't lying, but maybe you think you're being manipulative, fluffing the narcissistic person up when you have to share something difficult, or asking someone else you know that the narcissistic person will listen to to be the one to ask them whatever needs to be asked. So now you're having to triangulate too. And all of this feels icky and deceitful and not who you are. I know many a person who has the proverbial coffee can story, you know, who had dire financial needs in a narcissistic relationship that they knew would never be met. And so they would maybe get some money or ask for some money related to the household. And through clever budgeting and using coupons and discounts and all the rest of it, would be able to make, for example, the grocery purchase come in about $20 cheaper, and painstakingly save those little bits and pieces of money that they would save to ultimately make those purchases. I saw that happen throughout my own family system. Years and years of scraps of cash skimmed off the top so a family member could help other family members that the narcissistic family member would never allow to happen. Is that deceit, to put that $20 away in the coffee can? That's for you to decide. In a narcissistic relationship, you may not be doing anything wrong, but the narcissistic person's tendency to criticize your friends or people that you just merely enjoy spending time with, or your colleagues, or even their control over your schedule, may mean that you lie about whom you are with. You don't tell them that you're spending time with your friend having a cup of coffee because you don't want to hear it and hear the criticisms. Or you tell them that you're going out of town with a friend that the narcissistic partner likes, who is also willing to be the alibi. So you could go check in on a struggling family member that your narcissistic partner would throw a tantrum about if they knew you were helping them. That's how twisted this gets. You may lie about working late so you could just go have some fun and go shopping with a friend. It doesn't feel good. But for many of us, it beats the hell out of one more protracted argument, one more painful example and reminder about how bad the relationship is. Sadly, when we lie about these small things, the relationship is more likely to sustain and we start feeling like the bad person because we're the ones who are not telling the truth. Over time, the entire narcissistic family system or relationship becomes an exercise in what we call subterfuge, a big spy novel. Nobody's telling the truth. And everyone is learning how to ask for one thing, which is not the thing they need to get the thing they need. Or they don't tell the truth about what they are doing, or even who they are, or coming up with alibis. You may play music in a band at night and tell them that you're off doing something playing squash or something. People who grow up like this or in relationships like this will say, I feel completely inauthentic. I feel like a fraud. I feel like I'm a big liar. And for some folks in these systems, the lies start to become more and more natural. And folks have said to me, you know, what sucks is I found myself starting to lie in places I didn't need to. Because we forget that there are healthy relationships out there where we can tell the truth. But lying, when we've been through a narcissistic system, feels almost normalized and necessary, and may even become reflexive, the only way to get a need met or to avoid their rage, whether it's silent rage or noisy rage. There are quite a few narcissistic systems that sort of look perfect to the world. Everyone looks good in pictures. Everyone's doing the things they're supposed to be doing. They hit their stride on social media and look oh so happy on their vacations. And that can come at the price of lies. External images can often lead us to think a family is working well, but it is often held together by an intricate system of lies. And those lies can sit like a brick in the psyches of the people in the system who may view themselves as inauthentic or even not know how to be in a healthy relationship. And the most prominent thing we see is shame. Lots and lots of shame. Shame for lying, shame from being part of this system, shame for coming from this system. Now, for those of you who had this going on since childhood, you had to survive in this system. So the lying for survivor, well, I don't know, maybe a philosopher would argue differently. But to me, psychological safety tends to win out. and the child will learn the tricks of the system to be able to get through life. That is what survival is. And if you choose to die on the hill of honor and always telling the truth, the emotional abuse may end up exhausting you, or worse, if you are from one of these family systems. In adult relationships, you may want the relationship to last for all the attachment and connection and the practical reasons and love reasons that are out there. But you may also find that the lying is the way to navigate this relationship. It may be small ticket stuff, lying about going to one grocery store, but then going to another because the longer drive clears your head and gives you time away from the narcissistic person or the narcissistic system. Truth, ultimately, is us showing up fully as ourselves. It is respectfully speaking what is real to us, putting words to our values, existing and presenting as our true selves. Well, all of that sounds great on paper, but it is not only impossible in all narcissistic relationships. I hate to say it, but even some not very narcissistic relationships can't tolerate this. Your truth is often another person's problem, so it may get shut down. But to survive in a narcissistic relationship, you cannot share your truth. To have even a shred of your true self while you are in a narcissistic relationship or from a narcissistic family, you have to deny who you are. And that's the biggest lie of all. Is it no wonder then that you are going to lie about how much the milk cost, or who you had lunch with, or that you took the long way home, or that you were actually not playing soccer after school? The shadowy half-truths and half-lies we find to be essential to sustain a narcissistic relationship. A pattern that can fill you with shame and leave you wondering if your behavior is just as bad as that of the narcissistic toxic people around you. It doesn't mean that your identity is that of a liar. That makes you someone attempting to do the impossible, which is to exist and get your needs met in a narcissistic system. To not be our true self in a relationship, it's the ultimate deceit. And unfortunately, since it is not possible to safely be our true selves or even develop our true selves in these relationships, we then have to take on the shameful burden of living through a series of lies. I remember so well somebody who was in a narcissistic relationship telling me that the lying was not only survival, there was an interesting twist to the lie that also I want to leave you with. It was a long-term relationship the person had had. A lot of reasons that this person didn't feel necessarily safe getting divorced. And the partner had all kinds of trackers on the car, trackers on the phones, because there was one family phone plan. So the partner always knew where this person was. And one time this person was going to run an errand, like at one of these, big box type stores, and there were several in the area they lived. And she said, I went to XYZ store, okay? And he said, no, you didn't. And she said, yeah, I did. Look at all the stuff. And she's showing the big items she'd bought. No, you didn't. You actually went to this store. And he was right. He knows because he tracked her. So she would. And I asked her, I said, so if you kind of almost knew you were going to get caught, why didn't you just tell the truth? It wasn't a high stakes issue. Why didn't you tell the truth about going to the store? And she said, I've lost all of myself in this relationship, that somehow it felt like a tiny win to say I went to a big box store, but just say I went to the other one. So sometimes the lies aren't even just about getting needs communicated. Sometimes it is not a way of just sort of sometimes it's just being your own person in this, even when you know you're going to get caught. And that for her, in a way, even though it ended up in this sort of sinister, weird, punitive thing about, no, you didn't, you went to that store. The partner ultimately let it go, because it's not like she said she was going to the big box store A and ended up going to a bar. But for her in that moment, having a moment as her true self happened to be worth the lie. But it doesn't feel good, and a lot of people feel bad about it. But you have to ask yourself, what price survival in these relationships? The lying is often one of those prices. Let's talk about desperation triangulation. So you know your friend's husband, who is someone that your narcissistic partner admires, is someone your narcissistic partner listens to, and also sometimes feels competitive and jealous with. And you figure out, though, that if your friend's husband suggests something to your partner, but your partner thinks it's a great idea, but if you were to suggest the same thing, your partner would dismiss it or say it's a bad idea. So maybe you need your partner to get on board with something, whatever it is, big or small. So you try and figure out a way through your friend to suggest to her husband that he should suggest it to your partner, because that's the only way you could get your partner to agree to it or to even think it's possibly a good idea. You can substitute the players any way you want. Maybe you go through a mother-in-law or a partner's sibling or something like that. I know one narcissistic relationship where the wife will often tell the neighbor, who also happens to be a general contractor, that she needs something fixed around the house. And then the neighbor will be the one to suggest it to that woman's husband, because that's the only way it's going to get done. This happens in families, in intimate relationships, in workplaces, anywhere that there are narcissistic people, and people in those relationships need to get things done. I call this the desperation triangulation because it's actually not healthy. It is still triangulation, but it is a byproduct of desperation, needing usually to get something done or agreed to. So for example, you cannot do the thing without the buy-in or the agreement or the signature of the narcissistic person. But the narcissistic person in your life is so dismissive, and literally as soon as words start coming out of your mouth, they're just dismissive of them. Now, some folks try something a little different. Instead of the desperation triangulation, they try suggesting the opposite of what they want. So they'd say, oh, I would hate it if we changed the color of the dining room, in hopes that the narcissistic person would then want to change the color of the dining room just to do the opposite. That's a bit of a long shot, frankly. But that doesn't work as well. A lot of stars have to line up for that one. Listen, narcissistic people may be selfish, but they're actually acutely aware of interpersonal manipulations, maybe because they are so good at them. So you can only be so transparent about this. The desperation triangulation requires a few ingredients that not everyone has. First, it requires someone that the narcissistic person will actually listen to. Now, that could be anything from one of their friends, a family member, a trusted and admired associate or neighbor. In that case, I told you, a person who has a knowledge base about something that they respect, that kind of thing. Second, it requires that you have some kind of in with that third person that the narcissistic person listens to. That may not always be the case, because unfortunately, in many cases, the narcissistic person may have, if not fully poisoned, definitely sullied other people's opinion of you, especially people that they admire. So you may or may not always have that direct in with a third party. Third, it also requires that there's some buy-in to your idea. So for that third person to suggest this thing, whatever it is, it would be plausible for them to suggest it to the narcissistic person. Because if the third person thinks it's not a good idea, that friend or whomever, even if it is a good idea, then that's not going to happen. The desperation triangulation is not an uncommon play in a narcissistic relationship. Think about it. It's you saying to one of the narcissistic person's friends, like, hey, can you just talk to them? See if they would be open to taking a vacation to that place instead of that place. Or can you talk to them to find out where they stand on getting a newer car. So you're sort of using this person as a sort of go-between messenger that the narcissistic person is willing to listen to, because the narcissistic person in many relationships may have developed such contempt for you or devaluation of you, or just simply views you as stupid, that they simply don't listen to you. Now, in some cases, the desperation triangulation may be a two-step process where you have to convince the third person, that third party, of the goodness of your idea so that they can then go and talk to the narcissistic person about it. So it's all actually just really exhausting. And the challenge with the desperation triangulation is that you will end up feeling icky about it, even though it is merely a survival behavior. But it still feels manipulative. And like all triangulation, it is not particularly healthy. And that can lead to that sense of, oh, maybe I'm just as bad as them. Or, well, narcissistic or manipulative people triangulate. Well, I'm triangulating, so oh no, maybe I'm narcissistic too. Once upon a time, when I was teaching basic introductory psychology, like human behavior 101 stuff to undergraduates, I asked my students, would you steal? And almost all of them said no. And then I asked, what if you were hungry, or your child or someone counting on you was hungry and you had no money? Would you steal? Then more hands up. Now, these students were not thieves, but they would engage in theft under circumstances of survival. I would too. Again, I'm not a thief. Perhaps a philosopher would argue differently in my willingness to steal under the right conditions. But that is why people feel so bad about themselves in these relationships. Survival, while it is about resilience and courage, it can also mean that we behave in ways that are out of line with our values, our morals, and our true selves. Most of us may actually not be natural triangulators. In fact, we may be very direct and open and self-aware communicators, or be able to do that in our healthier relationships. And yet, in the narcissistic relationship, that doesn't work. So we will do things like the desperation triangulation to survive. Sometimes we do it to get basic needs met because there is no direct way to ask for the thing, or to ensure that something special can happen in a special way, or to avoid regret down the line for giving in on one more thing. Sure, we can look back someday and say, I know why I did it. But for a long time, a lot of survivors will feel a lot of shame, moral injury, guilt, and a general sense of ick. Like, ugh, look at me doing icky things just like the narcissistic person in your life. And that can actually hamper healing. I don't judge the desperation triangulation. Survival is not easy, especially when most people around you don't understand it. Listen, far more people would forgive you for stealing food if you were starving than for pulling out some manipulative tricks to get a new appliance because the one you have is about to burn the house down, and the narcissistic person won't cooperate around replacing it. Some of this is because they may actually be able to communicate with, these other people may be actually able to communicate with the narcissistic person and may not have any empathy for your inability to do so. They'll put it on your lack of capacity rather than the narcissistic person not being cooperative. So does the desperation triangulation always work? No. Especially if the narcissistic person gets any sense at all that it is happening, because hell hath no fury than a narcissistic person who feels that they are being played. You also can't use it too often. Some people use it only in the most desperate circumstances, thus the name, desperation triangulation, to address, for example, a situation of safety or for a true north situation. For example, to get something for their kids that the narcissistic person won't agree to for selfish reasons. But if you keep doing it, it won't work. The desperation triangulation is a strategy that can only be used sparingly. And since you need so many ingredients, so many moving parts to line up to make it work, it's not a strategy that is available to everyone. As with all survival habits in a narcissistic relationship, we have to be aware of what they are about. And sadly, when we are in survival mode, our level of awareness slips a bit. The reason awareness is so key is so these patterns don't seep into our healthy relationships. And so we don't lose our muscle for communicating or clearly or directly with people where we can do that. Sadly, now if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, sometimes this muscle doesn't get to develop at all. That doesn't mean it can't develop, it can. But just like anything we learn in adulthood for the first time, it takes a little longer and it's a little clunkier. But if you are becoming more isolated as a result of the narcissistic relationship, it's easy to see how you can lose or never get to develop those skills and fall into some of these tactics like desperation triangulation in a more regular way. Can we unlearn these bad habits, like the desperation triangulation? Absolutely, yes. Many people will say, I developed terrible relationship behaviors by being in a narcissistic relationship. I started lying more to avoid arguments. I became more shady and secretive so I could see friends. I triangulated. And you may have had to unlearn those patterns. And unlearning them in part happens as we develop trust in new relationships, which is not easy to do, but we can do it. We may sadly even get burned and do the survival stuff like the desperation triangulation in our healthy relationships and get called out on it. It isn't easy to deprogram from a narcissistic relationship. But with time, it happens, and it requires self-compassion, viewing it contextually, building healthy social networks, slowly building trust in ourselves and others, and learning how to ask for what we need. And it can be like trying to learn to ride a bike for the first time. There are lots of desperation behaviors we can fall into to survive within a narcissistic relationship, and triangulation is one of them. Just pay attention, see the context, but remain aware. Healing isn't just growth. It's putting down the unhealthy stuff that we needed to take on to navigate and survive these relationships and situations. One thing we always learn is that communication is supposed to be a great relationship tool. Well, once we've been through a narcissistic relationship, in some ways, we stop seeing the value of communication. And let's take that on. So, listen, any of you who have read a book on healthy relationships or having a relationship or marriage, any book on relationships that you read, any couples therapist that you talk to, anything even beyond intimate relationships, will always focus on communication. And not just the words, but also self-awareness, listening, tone. Communication is not just the actual words we say, but how we say them. In healthy relationships, we're always tweaking this, and we make mistakes. And healthy relationships can tolerate those mistakes, and we clean it up, and then we get it right. And the communication game in relationships has gotten much more complex with texting and DMing and emailing, and written words feel different and are a different way to communicate than spoken words, and then forget about it. I'm not even touching emojis. But with two healthy people, communication is everything. And like anything, sometimes communication needs calibration. And with two healthy people, paying attention to communication does work. Then there is the narcissistic relationship. And the problem is that a lot of the guidance and advice people in these relationships get is just recycled from regular relationship advice, and it always comes back to communication. And many times, you as the person who may keep trying to make it better and can't, you may actually be the one who is told to keep communicating, and maybe you're the problem, and the problem is that you're not communicating well enough, right? Because we always bring it down to communication. All of us pick up a lot of bad habits in every narcissistic relationship we've ever been in. And most of these bad habits, or many of these bad habits, are bad communication habits. We learn not to share. We learn not to share our feelings. We learn to not directly communicate, because obviously it's going to be shut down. We learn to obsess over every single word we choose because of the myriad gotcha moments and the legalistic ways that narcissistic people will catch us on tiny semantic issues. We hold back from sharing things because it will be too exhausting to deal with the aftermath. We find roundabout ways to ask for things so we can get things done or so they aren't offended. We also have to turn ourselves off from listening to everything, or we would end up walking around devastated all the time. And we have to learn to sort through their word salad for the bits and pieces that we need to get an answer to a question. We gray rock to avoid saying the wrong thing or to avoid giving them supply. We have to learn to think tactically about what we do or say. In these relationships, we are basically cut off from healthy speaking, healthy listening, basically any healthy form of communication. And sadly, some people find that after being in a narcissistic relationship, they find it difficult to even talk with any other people. Some folks who have been through narcissistic relationships may find that they sort of over talk when they finally have the opportunity to be with healthy people because it has been such a long time since they've been in a space where they've heard. Others find, who's been through narcissistic relationships, find that they've become very inhibited when they talk to other people. And even others find that they're almost out of practice in talking with people and feel deeply socially awkward when they are with regular folks in regular conversation. By the time we either get it or understand what narcissism is or leave one of these relationships, by that time, our communication skills are a mess. The idea of being straightforward is gone for us. We learn to play these chess moves to get basic things, and so even we will see that we are convoluted in how we are trying to get things across. Our trust plummets. So it can be hard to hear things that people are saying to us at face value. We may move forward into other relationships where we might actually end up being criticized for not being more open in our communication or for not being willing to share our feelings. We may simply find it difficult to ask for or say things directly, which is actually bad communication. I've known people who've been through narcissistic relationships who are so destabilized by what has happened in the narcissistic relationship that sort of going forward, they have this sort of compulsive drive to want to write things down just so they can maintain a train of thought. Or you may not even trust your own recollections of conversations, so you may find yourself also fumbling. I can't count how many times that survivors have showed up to my live Q&A events and they're apologetic because they say, "Oh, I feel so bad. I'm so sorry. I can't express myself clearly." Communication for people who've been through narcissistic relationships feels like it doesn't work because it didn't work in those relationships. In narcissistic family systems, you learn that communication was based in fear, in hierarchies, and that some voices in the family mattered and then others didn't. And that one person's word is law and no other opinions matter. That people talk over each other and interrupt each other. In narcissistic workplaces, people make assumptions. They put words in your mouth. They don't listen. Similar patterns are also observed in narcissistic friendships. So if you were to bring healthier communication into these systems, it would basically go nowhere fast. You actually get sort of acculturated or indoctrinated into the idea that trying to communicate in a healthy manner sort of puts you in harm's way. So it can take a minute to slowly come back into it. It's as though healthy communication is a language of its own that we need to relearn, or maybe even learn for the first time. But it can really absolutely take a minute to get there. And being told that the thing that we try, the way we try to talk genuinely, tried with a family member or partner or at work or a friend, is what actually can work with a healthy with a healthy person, can require its own leap of faith. The mistake that so much of the guidance on communication makes is that it doesn't couch it in a fundamental truth. Communication only works with two healthy, self-aware, well-regulated, non-antagonistic people. That's it. Otherwise, it's worthless, like having just one shoe when you need two. So the better way to think about it is that communication is a magnificent tool for building closeness, intimacy, connection, and safety when the other person is communicatable, meaning that they are also self-aware and empathic and respectful and present. And in the absence of that, it's just one more piece of advice that shames people in these relationships. It can take a minute to trust that communication can work and to have faith in it. And it can also take another minute to get your skills back, both on the giving and receiving side of communication. When communication works, it works. In narcissistic relationships, it doesn't have a chance. Maybe the only way in a narcissistic relationship is to phone it in, right? Doing the right thing, feeling guilty, duty, responsibility. These are many of the things that keep people in or keep people continuing to engage with narcissistic relationships. So take a minute, pause the video if you have to. Write down what keeps you stuck in this relationship, in a narcissistic relationship. If you're watching this channel, I think it's safe to assume that you have at least one narcissistic relationship in your life that you can't fully get out of. You might have more than one, but take a minute, and you can choose more than, we can talk about all of them, but take a minute and write down the why. Why can't you get out of it? I don't suggest any exercise without doing it. And I reflected on the narcissistic relationships in my life I can't get out of. And the reasons for me were duty, obligation, as a means to be able to stay in touch with somebody else, professional reasons. So when I really boiled it down and I got to the core of it, it was really almost completely duty, obligation, some sense of responsibility, and some practical issues. And when you look back before this, the narcissistic relationships that you were in the past, there may have been other reasons that you were stuck in narcissistic relationships. But as you learn more, practice radical acceptance, see it clearly, address the trauma bonding, you still can't get rid of all of these relationships. And it can be useful to get at your personal why. And you know that these relationships are a challenge, especially if they've been around for a while and you can't get out of them easily. So in these relationships, you learn to phone it in. Frankly, gray rocking, yellow rocking, disengagement, they're all manifestations of phoning it in. And if you have ever had a job where you phoned it in, you know what it's about. It was just the paycheck and nothing more, you know. So if you're phoning it in, you kind of do the right things. You say please and thank you. You get a sandwich, you might grab them a sandwich too. You don't get into the passive-aggressive mud with them. You don't expect that they will change. You don't share anything with them. It is, in essence, kind of showing up in a relationship with all the feeling out of it. You really don't care. But you do it maybe because you're a responsible a person, or because there's something else you want, right? You may not be antagonistic or sadistic or mean. You don't give them the silent treatment. You phone it in. It's words without music, right? It's showing up, but not being fully present. You talk with them about superficial things like the weather. You engage in superficial gestures like grabbing them a sandwich. You bring your famous casserole to the toxic family potluck, but you don't really give a shit if they like it or not. Sadly, phoning it in is the only way these relationships work, because few of us live in a world of luxury where we cut off all of these relationships. In most cases, the collateral losses would be too high. None of us are independently wealthy, and we can't afford to walk away from jobs or relationships where shared finances are a thing. People around you may actually think it looks odd. It sort of looks like a relationship or a family from the outside. You show up with the potluck dish, the gift. You drive them to the airport, you drive them to the doctor, you buy them the Secret Santa gift, you listen to them talk about the weather, you listen as they talk about how the plumber screwed them over. Most people are not observant enough to notice that nothing is coming back at you. You just listen. And you radically accepted, so you know it won't. You engage in the sort of showing up, but it's superficial. And sadly, since most people in the world only notice or care about the superficial dance of the relationship, did you send a thank you note? Did you do the check-in text? Did you drive them where they needed to be driven? And they don't really pay attention to the depth of it. To the outside world, your phoning it in may even look like a normal relationship. And that is to your advantage, because you may be phoning it in because of a larger systemic issue. Trying to support other people in the workplace or family system, or a culturally ingrained sense that you need to take care of someone in a narcissistic family system, but really, you don't give a damn about them. But, and just as all things narcissistic relationshipy, the news is not all good if you are phoning it in. Because the more time you have to spend in these phoned-in relationships, it is in essence like living in a mildly dissociated state. Words without music, moving through the motions, doing the errand, listening to the banal conversation where they ask you nothing about yourself. You're basically an unpaid TaskRabbit, engaging in social graces like bringing them a coffee too when you do the coffee run, or picking them up, or driving them. All of these are motions, and they are rarely reciprocated. The more that these are your primary social relationships, and the less you get to live in the world of the not phoned in, the more you are living, in a sense, separated from yourself. And over time, this can mean you feel numb, depleted, apathetic, sad, and over time you may even feel empty and disconnected. Sure, there may be days in this phoned-in universe when the narcissistic person may actually be a little nicer than usual, or might even ask you about your day, or maybe even pick you up the coffee and get your order. Those days and the number of ways they show up are not reciprocal. They're just moments of good luck, like finding $1 in the street. That can't be a financial plan for you. The chronic phoning in that people have to do, the people who find themselves maintaining narcissistic relationships for all the reasons that people maintain them long after the confusion and trauma bonding and not understanding narcissism lifts. You get it, right? It's the stuff that's keeping you in might be minor children, money, legal stuff, duty, obligation, culture, health insurance, housing, immigration. While it is the only path forward, it does come with a cost. This is why having a few healthy relationships becomes so important. Relationships where it is reciprocal. You feel seen, valued, heard, where you have conversations where you can be yourself. Having those spaces in your life can make the phoning it in bearable. You can see it in a context. You recognize that it's not you, that the phoning it in is a survival strategy. That probably brings up some grief whenever you have to do it. And because that constant grief doesn't feel good, we get more and more numb as we do more and more phoning it in. But if we don't have some spaces in our lives that are mirrored and healthy, nor in an accurate way, then we find ourselves living in a detached, fragmented, and dissociated space, and relationships become robotic places, where you do the so-called right thing, but it's no different than being a dutiful employee. The words without music, phone it in, show up the way the world expects you to, can mean that the world thinks that your relationship with a narcissistic person or a narcissistic system is fine. After all, you are doing the things. The narcissistic person will rarely notice the lack of closeness or reciprocity if their needs are being met, but you are losing pieces of yourself when this happens. Phoning it in is also tricky, because the more you distance from yourself, the more numbed, the more distracted, you actually find yourself making mistakes. You forget things. You don't have attention in the same way. You misplace things. It affects your life, your work. And since survivors already doubt and question and devalue themselves, this only makes it worse. Obviously, the contrast to this, yelling and screaming and trying to get the narcissistic person to hear you or notice you, well, I suppose that is an option. It is not only an exhausting option, it can feel very out of reach for people who are triggered by conflict and anger and rage. And it can also be destabilizing for other people in the environment. If you show strong emotion, it'll often mean that everyone thinks you're the problem, you're the rager, you're the one who's crazy, you're the one who's not regulated. And this chronic pursuit of conflict is not in most people's nature. This kind of fight often gets wrung out in narcissistic relationships, leaving our fawning, frozen selves robotically going through the motions. If you are phoning it in, you got to remember to do things like cultivating other healthy supports, and also have to remain aware that you are phoning it in, so you don't normalize phoning it in as a way to go through all of your relationships. It can become tricky when the phoning it in sort of breaches the dam, and we start finding ourselves phoning it in even in our healthy relationships. It's hard to turn on and off that dissociative numbness, and the more phoning it in we do, the greater the risk of this. You have to be aware you are doing it and why you are doing it, remaining present and in your body, being aware that it is strategic, less numbing, more intention, in a way that is self-affirming. I am not bringing my best self to this, but I am also going to continue to show up as a decent human being because that is who I am. Harness that fight in you so the phoning it in doesn't feel like phoning it in as much as it feels like you being strategic and being open-eyed about what this relationship is really about. This kind of awareness is tiring. Phoning it in a numb way can almost feel easier, but it is so important to recognize that the phoning it in of it all is you viewing this relationship in a larger, accurate, clear context. Perhaps of you showing up compassionately, even when it is not reciprocal, and a reminder that this relationship did not take your compassionate nature away from you. You're not expecting them, you're no longer expecting them to change or be better. And it's a way to maintain a regulated environment despite the tantruming and the selfishness and the thin-skinned reactivity of the narcissistic person in it. Or you're protecting other people in the environment who may not be able to have a strong voice, like your kids. After years of engaging with a narcissistic person and believing that it could change, certainly phoning it in is an improvement, but it still takes a toll on you. Obviously, the win is that if we could get it to a place where we don't have these relationships in our lives, but we don't live in that world. Just being aware that almost like too much of a good thing can harm us, too much of this strategy, phoning it in, can also take a toll. You have to do it if you can't get away from these relationships, but just be sure if you're doing it, keep the larger context in mind so you recognize that this is part of the larger landscape of radical acceptance. I hope that's helpful, and thanks again.